She had always believed that hard work and patience were enough to get her anywhere. When she first joined the company, she thought she would be respected for her effort and her willingness to learn. Instead, she quickly realized that the world she had entered was far harsher than she had imagined. She was a small part of a large machine, one of many people whose voices went unheard, whose presence barely mattered, and whose value was measured only by how much they could serve others. From the very first day, it was clear she was invisible, except when someone needed her to do something they didn't want to do themselves. She was handed the simplest, most tedious tasks, yet people acted as if those tasks were beneath her. The work was not difficult, but the way others treated her made it unbearable. She found herself answering endless questions for people who could have found the answers themselves. She fetched coffee, organized files, ran errands, and corrected small mistakes for people who barely even acknowledged her existence. Every morning, she would walk into the office feeling a mix of hope and dread. She hoped that today might be different, that maybe someone would notice her, that someone would see her potential. But as soon as she stepped into the building, the old pattern repeated itself. Colleagues would call her over for insignificant things, give her impatient looks, or dismiss her ideas without listening. She tried to smile, to respond politely, to remind herself that respect had to be earned. But each interaction chipped away at her confidence. The worst moments were when she made the tiniest mistakes. She could spend hours preparing a report, double-checking every detail, making sure every number was correct, only to have a manager glance at it for a second, frown, and point out a minor error. The criticism was never constructive. It was sharp, humiliating, and public. She would feel her face flush, her heart pound, but she would nod, apologize, and fix it. She learned quickly that showing frustration was dangerous. Showing weakness was even worse. Some days, she would leave the office feeling completely exhausted, not from the work itself, but from the constant mental and emotional strain of being undervalued. She would sit in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake by joining this company. She had grown up believing that perseverance and talent would take her far. She had studied, worked hard, and pushed herself beyond her limits. Yet, here she was, treated like a servant rather than a professional. Her family and friends offered support, of course, but they didn't fully understand what it was like. They could not feel the weight of being constantly overlooked or mocked. The frustration of knowing she was capable of so much more, but being trapped in a position that never allowed her to show it. She tried explaining, but most people would respond with cliches. Just keep trying, or you'll get your chance someday. Those words, while meant to comfort, often felt hollow. They did not carry the understanding of the humiliation she faced daily. One particularly difficult day, she was asked to clean up a mess someone else had created. A client's report had been misplaced, and rather than taking responsibility, the senior staff member turned to her. She spent the entire afternoon locating files, retyping pages, and correcting errors. When she finally presented the completed work, she barely received a word of thanks. Instead, she was reminded that she should have been faster, as if her effort was meaningless. She sat back at her desk, feeling a deep frustration she couldn't voice. She thought about quitting, but she had no other opportunities lined up, no safety net, and she couldn't bear to give up so easily. Despite the daily challenges, she found small ways to keep herself motivated. She observed everything carefully, the way the company operated, the way clients reacted, the patterns in the workflow that no one seemed to notice. She took mental notes, quietly learning skills beyond her assigned tasks. Even when people ordered her around, she was absorbing knowledge, practicing patience, and developing a sense of strategy. She knew that someday this experience could serve her. If she could just survive long enough to make it count, there were moments of kindness. 2 brief flashes that reminded her she was not invisible to everyone. A colleague would occasionally offer a friendly word or a piece of advice. A client might thank her for her attention to detail. These small gestures gave her hope, little sparks that kept her going through the endless days of menial work. But she also knew that hope alone would not change her circumstances. She needed more than recognition from a few people. She needed control over her own destiny. At home, she would spend hours thinking about ways to improve her situation. She read books about business, success, and leadership. She watched videos of entrepreneurs and leaders, absorbing every lesson she could. She kept a notebook, jotting down ideas, planning steps she might take in the future. Sometimes she would imagine a life where she was no longer at the bottom, where she was respected and in charge, where she could make her own decisions. Those moments of imagination were the only real escape from her daily reality. Her determination grew quietly, almost invisibly, like a seed sprouting in the dark. She started experimenting with small improvements in her tasks at work, finding ways to do things more efficiently without drawing attention to herself. She became the person who could be relied upon to solve problems, even when others had failed. Yet she kept a low profile. She had learned early that visibility without strategy could be dangerous in this environment. It was better to be underestimated than to be challenged too early. Even as the days passed in a blur of tasks and criticism, she began to notice patterns in the way her colleagues operated. Some of them were careless, overconfident, or too focused on appearances. She realized that knowledge was power, and she quietly amassed it, filling gaps in her understanding that no one else seemed to care about. She made lists, asked discreet questions, and observed client needs. Slowly, she was building a foundation, brick by brick, for something much larger than anyone around her could imagine. The mental strain was immense, but it also taught her resilience. She learned to control her emotions, to respond calmly to insults, to transform anger into focus. She discovered that endurance itself was a skill, one that would serve her in ways she could not yet see. Each day of being ordered around, of being underestimated, became a lesson in strategy, patience, and observation. She began to feel a quiet confidence growing inside her, sensed that she was preparing for something greater, even if she could not yet fully define it. It was not an easy journey. Many nights she cried quietly, frustrated at the injustice and the unfairness of her situation. She questioned herself, wondered if she was overreacting, or if she simply wasn't good enough. But each morning, she returned to the office, forced a smile, and continued her work. She refused to let despair define her. Somewhere deep inside, she carried a belief that her life could be different, that the humiliation she endured today could become the fuel for her triumph tomorrow. Gradually, she began to notice small changes in herself. She was more patient, more observant, more deliberate in her actions. She learned to navigate office politics without becoming a target. She understood which battles were worth fighting and which could be used as stepping stones. She became adept at listening, analyzing, and responding in ways that kept her ahead of those who dismissed her. Every insult, every task she was ordered to do, became part of her education, preparing her for a future she had not yet revealed to anyone. Her colleagues, of course, did not notice this transformation. They continued to see her as someone to be ordered around, someone who would always be on the sidelines. They laughed at her eagerness to please, assumed she lacked ambition, and mocked her quiet diligence. They could not see that beneath the surface she was learning, planning, and growing stronger. They could not imagine that the girl they thought was weak and submissive was quietly building the very foundation that would one day allow her to stand above them all. And so, she continued to arrive early, stay late, and complete every task with meticulous care. She swallowed insults and carried on with a calm exterior, all the while keeping her eyes open for opportunities, for lessons, and for ways to turn her knowledge into power. Each day of being underestimated was a test, a challenge she accepted with quiet determination. She knew that one day the very people who had dismissed her might see her in a completely different light. She did not yet know when or how, but she trusted in the process. In her own patience and intelligence, by the end of her first year, she was exhausted, worn down by the constant effort to survive in a world that undervalued her. But she was also stronger, sharper, and more aware than ever before. She had learned the true nature of power and the importance of preparation. She understood that being ordered around today could become an advantage tomorrow. The humiliation she suffered was not wasted, was molding her into someone who could endure, plan, and ultimately triumph. Though she remained quiet, unassuming, and diligent on the outside, inside she nurtured a quiet fire. A fire fueled by determination, by observation, and by the unshakable belief that she could change her life. She did not yet have control, but she had the one thing that mattered most: vision. She saw a future where she was no longer invisible, no longer ordered around, no longer dismissed. And she was willing to wait, learn, and endure until the day arrived when she could turn that vision into reality. Her life at the office continued, each day repeating in a familiar rhythm of tasks, orders, and minor humiliations. Yet, she carried herself differently now. She no longer felt like a victim. She felt like a student, a strategist, someone preparing quietly for a time when all her effort, patience, and learning would pay off. Each file she organized, each task she completed, and each slight she endured was a piece of the larger puzzle. She was slowly assembling in the moments when she walked through the office hallways. She imagined a different version of herself, someone confident, respected, and in control. She pictured walking into meetings and being heard, making decisions that mattered, and commanding respect effortlessly. These imaginings were not mere daydreams. They were rehearsals for the life she intended to create. She held on to them tightly, letting them guide her actions, sustain her patience, strengthen her resolve. And so the young woman continued her work, quietly observing, learning, and growing. The people around her continued to order her around, unaware that with every task and every insult, she was gaining knowledge, discipline, and understanding. They could not see the transformation unfolding beneath their very eyes, nor did they suspect that the very world they controlled might one day be influenced by the quiet, diligent girl they had dismissed. She endured, she learned, and she prepared. Because she understood something important: no one can underestimate the person who knows how to turn patience and endurance into power. And that was exactly what she intended to do. The days at the office continued with the same rhythm of menial tasks and subtle humiliation. But something inside her had begun to shift. She no longer simply endured. She observed, questioned, and learned. She started noticing patterns that others ignored: the way clients responded to certain emails, the shortcuts colleagues took that caused problems later, the gaps in company processes. All of it became clear to her. Where others saw routine, she saw opportunities. Where others saw obstacles, she saw lessons. Every evening, she would return to her small apartment with a growing sense of purpose. She set aside time to study quietly, researching the industry, learning the nuances that others took for granted, and even exploring business opportunities that had nothing to do with her current role. She realized that knowledge was power, and power was the only thing that could change her situation. She began to make detailed notes, developing strategies and plans that might one day help her break free from the constraints she faced. Her colleagues had no idea that the person they treated like an assistant was quietly preparing for a future that would astonish them. They continued to order her around, mock her efforts, and underestimate her intelligence. Yet every insult, every small humiliation fueled her determination. She learned to listen carefully, not just to what was said, but to what was left unsaid. Every tone of voice, every glance, every reaction was a clue. She was gathering information the way a chess player studies their opponent before a match. One evening, she noticed a problem that no one else had addressed. A client had repeatedly requested updates that were not being provided, and the project risked falling behind. Her colleagues were too busy with their own tasks to notice, and the managers assumed it would be handled. She took the initiative. Quietly, she reorganized the information, prepared a detailed summary, and sent it to the client with a concise explanation. She did not expect praise. She did it because she understood the importance of solving problems before they became crises. The response surprised her. The client thanked her personally and expressed relief at the clarity she provided. The manager, initially skeptical, acknowledged that the work had been done efficiently and correctly. It was a small victory, but it meant more to her than any public recognition could. She realized that competence, patience, and observation could yield results even when others refused to see them. That evening, she allowed herself a quiet smile. Recognition that she was slowly learning to navigate her environment with skill rather than frustration. She began to take her learning even more seriously. Outside of work, she enrolled in online courses related to management, project coordination, and industry-specific knowledge. She read biographies of successful people, paying attention not just to their achievements, but to the decisions, risks, and sacrifices that led to success. She understood that knowledge alone was not enough. She needed strategy, timing, and the courage to act. Every evening became a deliberate step toward empowerment, time to build skills and confidence that could not be taken from her. Her colleagues continued to underestimate her. They assumed that she was focused only on routine tasks, that she lacked ambition or vision. This misunderstanding became an advantage. While they focused on appearances, she focused on substance. She began noticing weaknesses in the company's processes, areas where inefficiencies could be exploited, ways in which her skills could create real value if she was allowed to take initiative. She quietly documented everything, understanding that preparation would be key when the right opportunity arose. One day, an unexpected challenge presented itself. A major client requested a complex proposal that required careful attention, deep knowledge, and fast turnaround. Most of her colleagues avoided the task, seeing it as too difficult or time-consuming. She saw it as a chance. She volunteered quietly, surprising the manager who had expected someone else to take it on. From the start, she approached the project differently. She carefully analyzed every requirement, consulted resources beyond her immediate knowledge, and anticipated potential problems before they occurred. The project demanded long hours and meticulous attention to detail. She worked late into the night, often staying alone in the office, refining the proposal, conducting calculations, and considering every possible scenario. The work was exhausting, but it was the first time she felt fully engaged, fully capable, and fully in control. For the first time, she saw the connection between effort and impact. Her work was not just completing a task, it was creating results that could not be ignored. As the deadline approached, her confidence grew. She had anticipated client concerns, prepared detailed explanations, and built a proposal that was not just competent, but exceptional. The manager, initially indifferent, could not help but notice the quality of her work. When the proposal was submitted, the client responded with genuine praise. They appreciated the clarity, the foresight, and the professionalism. It was a moment of quiet triumph. She realized that competence, combined with preparation and observation, could create opportunities even. In environments that were otherwise dismissive or hostile, the experience changed her perspective. She began to understand that she did not have to wait for recognition to prove her worth. She could create value independently, demonstrate skill through action, and build credibility over time. The humiliation and challenges of the past year were no longer just burdens. They were lessons. They had taught her patience, resilience, observation, and strategy. Every small setback had been a step toward developing the skills. She needed to succeed on her own terms. Her growing confidence led her to take small, calculated risks. She began proposing minor improvements in workflow, suggesting new approaches to problem solving and offering insights that others had overlooked. Some colleagues were surprised. Others dismissed her ideas. But she learned quickly which feedback was valuable and which was irrelevant. She refined her approach, presenting ideas in ways that could not be easily ignored, always ensuring that her actions demonstrated competence rather than self-promotion at the same time. She continued her studies outside of work. She explored entrepreneurship, management techniques, and client relations. Building a foundation that went beyond her current role, she understood that real power came not from titles or approval, but from knowledge, skill, and the ability to act decisively when the moment arrived. Each night, she documented her learning, refined her strategies, and imagined the life she wanted to create. These evenings became a sanctuary of growth and planning, a place where she could cultivate confidence and vision away from the judgments of others. Slowly, she began to notice changes in her own behavior. She was more assertive in meetings, more deliberate in her communication, and more aware of the dynamics around her. She no longer reacted impulsively to criticism or ridicule. Instead, she observed, analyzed, and responded strategically. She realized that control began with her self-control over her emotions, her focus, and her actions. By mastering these elements, she could influence the environment around her, even if others did not yet recognize her potential. One key insight she gained was the importance of patience. She had once believed that action meant immediate results, but experience had taught her that timing was crucial. She learned to wait for the right opportunities, to act decisively when the moment was ripe, and to prepare meticulously in the meantime. She understood that her colleagues' underestimation of her was not a limitation, but an advantage. They had no idea of the skills and knowledge she was quietly amassing, nor did they suspect the vision she was cultivating for her future. Her relationships with colleagues remained complicated. Some were supportive in small ways, offering occasional guidance or encouragement. Others were competitive, dismissive, or outright hostile. She learned to navigate these dynamics carefully, understanding that influence was earned through action and credibility, not confrontation. She practiced empathy, patience, and careful observation, recognizing that even those who seemed antagonistic could provide valuable insights or opportunities if approached strategically. Meanwhile, her personal life also reflected her growing sense of purpose. She began to invest in herself, developing habits that strengthened her mental and physical resilience. She exercised regularly, maintained a disciplined schedule, and prioritized activities that enhanced her focus and energy. She understood that her environment at work was demanding, but by taking care of herself, she could maintain the clarity, endurance, and emotional balance needed to succeed. The months passed, and she began to see tangible results from her quiet preparation. She became the person managers could rely on when challenges arose, as the one who could solve problems efficiently and effectively. Clients respected her professionalism, and colleagues gradually began to notice her competence, even if they still underestimated her ambition. She had created a subtle but undeniable presence, built entirely through skill, observation, and strategic action rather than title or authority. One day, she encountered a situation that would further test her abilities. A senior manager asked her to assist with a complex client issue, assuming she would follow instructions passively. She approached the task differently. She analyzed the problem, anticipated potential complications, and proposed solutions that were both innovative and practical. The senior manager was taken aback. The solutions were effective, efficient, and clearly the result of independent thought. It was the first moment she realized that her quiet diligence had positioned her to influence outcomes in ways that others could not. This experience reinforced her belief that knowledge and preparation were the keys to empowerment. She began to see that the world was not limited to those who commanded titles or seniority. Influence could be earned through competence, foresight, and action. She continued to develop her skills, expand her knowledge, and refine her strategies, understanding that every task, no matter how small or menial, was an opportunity to learn and prepare for future success. By the end of the year, she had transformed. She was no longer simply surviving the office environment. She was learning to thrive within it. She had discovered the power of observation, the importance of preparation, and the value of strategic action. She had turned humiliation and oversight into tools for growth, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that could not be ignored. She knew the path ahead would still be challenging, but she had the skills, resilience, and vision to navigate it successfully. She continued to dream, to plan and to act, knowing that one day, the knowledge, skills, and experience she was building would allow her to step beyond the limitations imposed by others. She had transformed from someone ordered around to someone quietly in control of her destiny. The foundation for her future had been laid, and she was ready to take the next steps when the right opportunities arrived. Through patience, observation, and determination, she had begun to turn her struggles into strengths. She had learned that being underestimated was not a weakness, but a chance to grow unnoticed until the time came to shine. And as she continued her journey, she carried the quiet knowledge that one day, the very people who had dismissed her would see that she had become someone they could no longer overlook. The turning point came quietly, without fanfare or warning. She had been steadily building her knowledge, observing the company's weaknesses, and quietly preparing herself for opportunities that she knew would eventually come. But she had not anticipated how quickly an opportunity would appear. One morning, the office was buzzing with tension. A major client had requested a new project, one that was highly visible, complex, and risky. Everyone was nervous. The senior staff avoided the assignment, whispering about how impossible it was, how it would likely fail. She watched as colleagues debated who should take the project. Each excuse, hesitation, and avoidance only confirmed what she had already suspected. Most people were unwilling to take responsibility. When real pressure was involved, they had grown comfortable in the safety of routine and avoidance. She realized that if she wanted to step into power, she had to take risks that others feared. Quietly, she volunteered. There was a moment of disbelief, then polite acknowledgement, but no one expected much from her. That was exactly what she needed. From the very first day, she approached the project differently. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress anyone with words or flashy presentations. Instead, she spent hours understanding every detail of the client's needs, studying previous project records, and identifying gaps that had caused problems in similar assignments. She noticed small errors others had ignored for years, small oversights that had created friction and frustration for clients. She began to map out a plan that addressed all of these issues, a plan that no one else could have created because no one else had cared to look closely. The initial days were exhausting. She spent long hours in the office, sometimes staying late into the night, reviewing documents, analyzing data, and testing different approaches. Her body ached, and her mind was constantly active, juggling multiple tasks and anticipating potential problems. But despite the fatigue, she felt alive in a way she never had before. This was the first time she realized her abilities could create tangible results, that her effort and intelligence could influence outcomes beyond routine tasks. For the first time, she felt like she was stepping out of the shadow that had followed her since she started working. Her colleagues watched, curious but skeptical. They noticed her dedication, but assumed it would end in failure. After all, she was just the one who had been ordered around for so long. How could she suddenly handle something so complex? Their doubts only strengthened her resolve. She knew that the moment she could demonstrate competence in a way that could not be ignored, she would shift the balance of power quietly but irreversibly. Step by step, she implemented her plan. She reached out to clients directly, clarifying their requirements and presenting options that made their goals achievable. She communicated with colleagues, not to assert authority, but to guide them efficiently. Anticipating obstacles before they became problems, she stayed calm under pressure even when unforeseen complications arose, treating each challenge as another piece of the puzzle to solve. Her approach was meticulous, patient, and thorough. It was during one of the most critical meetings that she realized just how far she had come. The client had raised concerns about timelines and deliverables, expecting delays and errors, as had happened before. She listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and then presented a clear step-by-step plan showing how each issue would be resolved. She anticipated their questions before they were asked and provided solutions that were practical and actionable. The client was visibly impressed. They had expected the usual excuses, delays, and confusion. Instead, they received clarity, confidence, and competence. Her manager, who had initially been indifferent, was equally surprised. They had assumed she was merely following instructions. But it became clear that she had taken ownership of the project in a way that no one else had. The manager began to see her differently, not as someone who needed guidance, but as someone capable of leading when it mattered. It was a quiet but significant shift. Respect was no longer demanded. It was earned through her actions. The project moved forward successfully, but not without challenges. There were technical problems, unexpected delays, and difficult client demands. She handled each with patience and strategy. When one obstacle seemed insurmountable, she took a step back, analyzed the situation, and devised a solution that addressed both the immediate problem and the underlying cause. She learned to think several steps ahead, to anticipate reactions, and to manage both expectations and outcomes effectively. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced her confidence and skill. Colleagues who had previously mocked or dismissed her began to notice. They observed her calm under pressure, her ability to solve problems, and her skill in navigating complex situations. Some were surprised. Others were resentful. But she did not let their reactions affect her. She had learned that attention and validation from others were not necessary for success. Competence, preparation, and strategic action were far more powerful. Her focus remained on the work itself, on creating results that could not be ignored. The more involved she became, the more she realized how much she had learned from her years of being underestimated. Every task she had completed, every slight she had endured, had prepared her for this moment. The patience she had cultivated allowed her to remain calm under pressure. The knowledge she had quietly amassed enabled her to see solutions where others saw only problems. The resilience she had developed made it possible to endure long hours and stressful situations. Without losing focus or composure, her past struggles had become the foundation for her current success. As the project neared completion, the results were undeniable. The client was satisfied beyond expectations, praising her clarity, foresight, and professionalism. They expressed confidence in her abilities and a willingness to work with her on future projects. Her manager acknowledged her contributions more directly than ever before, recognizing that she had not only managed the project effectively, but had improved processes that others had previously struggled with. For the first time, she realized that her work had tangible impact, that her influence extended beyond her immediate role. This success marked a turning point in her self-perception. She no longer saw herself merely as someone to be ordered around. She recognized her ability to lead, to solve complex problems, and to create value in ways that others had overlooked. Confidence replaced self-doubt, and clarity replaced frustration. She understood that the key to empowerment was not confrontation, but preparation, observation, and strategic action. By quietly mastering these skills, she had created opportunities that were previously unimaginable. The project's success also opened doors she had not expected. Colleagues began to approach her for advice, managers began to consult her for guidance, and clients sought her input on other matters. While she remained humble and focused on the work itself, she realized that her influence was growing. She was no longer invisible. The skills and knowledge she had developed in silence were now visible through results. And the perception of her as someone who could be ignored was slowly changing. Despite the recognition, she remained careful. She did not seek attention or boast about her accomplishments. She understood that her power came not from being noticed, but from being prepared, competent, and strategic. She continued to study, observe, and plan, knowing that each success was just one step in a longer journey. She had learned that influence was not a single achievement, but a pattern of consistent action over time. Each project, each interaction, and each challenge contributed to her growing presence and authority. The experience also taught her the importance of relationships. She began building connections with colleagues and clients based on respect, trust, and mutual understanding. She realized that power was not only about knowledge and skill, but also about the ability to navigate social dynamics effectively. By offering guidance without arrogance, listening without judgment, and helping without expectation, she strengthened her network and created allies who would support her in future endeavors. Her evenings continued to be a time for reflection and planning. She reviewed the project, noting what had worked well, what could be improved, and what lessons she had learned. She documented processes, strategies, and insights that could be applied to future challenges. This habit of careful reflection allowed her to internalize lessons quickly and to develop a personal framework for problem-solving and leadership. Each day, she became more capable, more confident, and more prepared for the opportunities that awaited. The success of the project also brought clarity about her long-term goals. She realized that she could not rely solely on her current position for growth. While her achievements were recognized, she understood that true control over her life required independence. She began exploring ways to create her own opportunities, to build something that would not be limited by the perceptions or decisions of others. She started researching potential ventures, analyzing markets, and considering how she could leverage her skills and experience to build a future on her terms. Through all of this, she maintained humility. She knew that power could be fleeting if it was not built on substance. She continued to approach each task with diligence, patience, and strategic thinking. She avoided shortcuts, avoided arrogance, and avoided complacency. Every success was seen as a step in a larger journey, not a final destination. She understood that true empowerment was a process, not an event. And she was committed to continuing that process with focus and discipline. Her colleagues, meanwhile, continued to underestimate her, unaware of the quiet transformation taking place. They saw her as competent in her current tasks, but did not recognize the depth of her preparation, the breadth of her knowledge, or the clarity of her vision. This misunderstanding worked to her advantage. While they assumed she was still subordinate, she was quietly positioning herself for even greater influence. The very act of being underestimated allowed her to act with freedom, to plan without interference, and to grow without obstruction. By the end of the project, she had not only succeeded but had fundamentally changed the way she was perceived. She had demonstrated competence, leadership, and strategic thinking in a way that could not be ignored. The project's success was not just a personal victory. It was a turning point in her career. She had moved from being someone who was ordered around to someone who could influence outcomes, guide others, and create value independently. She had proven, through action, that she was capable of far more than anyone had imagined. And yet, she did not stop there. She knew that one successful project was not enough to secure lasting influence. She continued to build skills, expand knowledge, and refine strategies. She maintained patience, resilience, and focus, understanding that empowerment was a long-term pursuit. She continued to observe, learn, and act strategically, knowing that each decision, each task, each interaction contributed to a foundation that would support her future success. In this period of growth, she also began to understand the importance of timing. She realized that opportunities often arrived unexpectedly, and that being prepared to act decisively was more valuable than any position or title. The skills she had developed, the knowledge she had acquired, and the confidence she had cultivated were all tools that would allow her to seize the right moment when it came. Patience, preparation, and action had become her guiding principles, and she trusted them completely. By the time the project was fully completed and recognized, she had transformed. She was no longer the person who simply followed orders. She had become someone capable of leading, influencing, and creating results. She had learned to turn observation into insight, preparation into action, and resilience into power. And as she looked forward, she knew that this was only the beginning. The turning point had arrived, and she was ready to take the next steps toward complete control over her destiny. After the success of the major project, everything in her world began to shift, though not immediately or obviously. The recognition she had earned did not come with grand announcements or awards. Instead, it came quietly in the way colleagues sought her input. Clients trusted her advice, and managers began to include her in discussions that once seemed out of reach. She realized that influence was subtle, often invisible at first, far more powerful because it could grow without interference. She had learned long ago that rushing toward authority rarely worked. True power came from competence, patience, and the ability to act decisively at the right moment. Her success had shown her that she could handle complex challenges. But she also understood that one project was not enough to secure lasting influence. She needed to consolidate her knowledge, expand her reach, and create opportunities that were independent of anyone else's opinion. Quietly, she began exploring ways to grow beyond the company. She had always been interested in entrepreneurship, but now, with experience and confidence, the idea became tangible. She started researching potential business ventures, identifying gaps in the market that matched her skills and knowledge. She analyzed trends, studied competitors, and spoke discreetly with professionals outside her immediate circle. Every interaction, every piece of research, added to the growing foundation she was building for her future. Meanwhile, at the company, her reputation was transforming. Colleagues who once dismissed her began to approach her for guidance, advice, or collaboration. Some were surprised by the depth of her knowledge. Others were quietly resentful. She remained careful, never flaunting her abilities, but she also stopped hiding them. She responded with calm confidence, demonstrating competence without arrogance. Slowly, people began to see her not just as someone capable, but as someone reliable, insightful, influential. The subtle shift in perception allowed her to take on larger responsibilities. She was invited to lead smaller projects, coordinate teams, and handle client interactions that previously would have gone to more senior staff. She approached these tasks with the same methodical preparation that had served her so well in the major project. She anticipated challenges, planned contingencies, and guided her colleagues without dominating them. Her leadership was quiet, strategic, and highly effective. While her influence grew, she continued to pursue her independent ambitions. She used her savings to invest in a small side project, one that required careful planning but promised long-term potential. She applied the skills she had learned at work organization, analysis, problem-solving to her venture, treating it with the same care and attention she had given to her projects at the office. She knew that this step would eventually allow her to take control of her future. Independent of anyone else's decisions or recognition, her evenings became a balancing act of work and preparation. She would complete her office tasks during the day and then dedicate hours to her side venture. She researched markets, contacted potential partners, and developed strategies for growth. It was exhausting, but the fatigue was different now. It was the kind that came from purposeful effort, from working toward something she had chosen for herself rather than tasks imposed upon her. Each evening she felt a growing sense of agency, a sense that she was slowly shaping her life rather than being shaped by others. At the office, she also began mentoring a few younger colleagues who were eager to learn. She shared her knowledge carefully, offering guidance without seeking personal credit. She understood that helping others grow did not diminish her own influence. In fact, it strengthened it. By building trust and respect, she created allies who would support her in the future and who would recognize the value of the quiet leadership she demonstrated every day. As the months passed, her side venture began to gain traction. Small wins reinforced her belief that she could create success on her own terms. She faced challenges, unexpected costs, delays, and occasional setbacks, but she applied the same resilience and problem-solving skills that had served her at work. Each obstacle was another lesson, another opportunity to refine her approach. She learned to anticipate risks, manage resources efficiently, and make decisions confidently, even under pressure. Her dual-life office, responsibilities, and entrepreneurial ambitions taught her valuable lessons about strategy and timing. She began to see connections between the two worlds. Skills she developed at work, like project management, client communication, and strategic thinking, could be applied to her business. Lessons from her venture, such as market analysis, negotiation, and resource management, enhanced her effectiveness at the office. She realized that she was creating a network of skills and experiences that reinforced each other, building a foundation far stronger than she had imagined.